But now it's time for our panel. And Andy, are you in the house here?
I'm here.
There he is.
I'm here.
Hello.
Greetings.
Right.
Greetings.
I am going to turn things over to you and let you introduce your panel and your panelists. So take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Hope you all had a good break. I have just taken the chance to make myself a new cup of tea, so I'm all set up for the next little while. I'm very excited to have an esteemed group of with me this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're sitting at the moment. So guys, would you like to open up your cameras and microphones and we can jump in? We have, hopefully somewhere, I see Richard. We have coming up shortly, there's John. We have John. We also have somewhere, I'm waiting for other people to dive on, or maybe I actually can't see everyone on the way my mosaic's working. I see Thomas there now, I see Peter. So of our esteemed team, the only person I know that was having a little bit of a challenge with their time schedule this morning was Gordon. He's going to be joining us imminently. So as soon as he's in, I know he's going to dive straight in and be part of the conversation. Right. Okay. So that's the people. Hopefully you've seen a little bit about where they're from, but I thought it would be really good for each of them just to tell you, because you're very familiar with seeing all of these people, a lot of these people on VSF panels and VSF presentations, but I thought it'd be good for each of them to tell you what they do in their day job. So let's start with John. What do you do in your day job?
Thanks, Andy. So my day job, I manage the product management team for infrastructure and networking at Imagine Communications, which is the sum of Leach and parts of Harris Broadcast and Astra, if any of you remember Astra, not the satellite company, the other Astra. And so my focus in that business unit has been the transition of a whole set of infrastructure products from SDI-based products that we still make and sell, and if you want one, by gosh, we have them, into IP-based workflow elements that you would use to build a forward-going facility.
Very good. Thank you very much. Now, over to Mr. Edwards. Thomas, tell us what you do in your day job.
Hi, everyone. Well, what do? I help customers meet their business objectives. I currently work for Amazon Web Services, where I'm a principal solutions architect specializing in broadcast. But previously I was with Disney, and then before the acquisition, Fox. And then before that, I spent some time at PBS in Washington, DC, about 20 years in the broadcast industry.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great to have you with us. Peter, over to you.
Hi, I'm the Chief Strategy and Cloud Officer for TAG Video Systems, which pretty much is exactly what it sounds like. So I really drive our technical direction and evaluate long-term strategy as well as business enablement. And that's what I do today. And I won't go through my whole history, but I've been around the block, including working for news organizations, including with Richard Friedel, who I see on the screen as well.
Very good. Thank you. So on that note, Richard.
Well, the most important thing for me to say is I'm, of course, the president of the VSF. So, the other issue is I actually retired from 26 years at Fox in January, and I'm doing a little bit of playing around with ATSC 3.0. But just for those who don't know, for the last 2-3 years, was responsible for Fox's television stations. And before the Disney Corporation acquired Fox, I was indeed responsible for Fox's television networks and cable channels across the United States.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, team. And as I said, Gordon will be here hopefully very shortly. He said he was going to dive in as soon as he was able to join us. So we look forward to him joining as well. And we'll get him to do a little intro when he actually manages to make it. Okay, so hopefully one or two of you may have seen my little presentation an hour ago, which was really partially a scene setting on looking at if you like, the technology transition and the acceptance of emerging technologies within the way we do live production. And you've probably seen, if you've been an avid follower of the VSF events over the last few years, the last couple of years, we've tried to do a bit of a panel session on what we nominally called cloud technology. And very much that was in the aim of kind of what's just over the horizon, what are we looking at, what's coming up shortly. And what I thought it would be really good to do this time, to make it a little bit different, or certainly at the start of the discussion anyway, is actually to try and look at the aspirations of content producers in general for live production. What are they actually looking for in what the technology will provide them to do? So what's the, if you like, the ideal end game from the end user perspective of this technology? And then hopefully we can have some discussions and work back from there to what the current, what technology is currently providing, and what is over the horizon, and what the roadmap is really from where we are today to where we believe the industry would like to get to. So what I thought we would do initially is just throw each of our esteemed panel a couple of minutes to actually give us a taster of what they see as is important things for customers moving forwards. So I think, seeing as he has already proclaimed himself a very customer-centric man, I thought we would start with Mr. Thomas Edwards. So Thomas, do you want to start the ball rolling by telling us just a few of the things that you think are important for customers as we evolve this technology?
Well, I want to start with something that actually Richard Friedel once said. And Richard, can you give us the credit card swiping quote?
I think you may remember it better than I, but I think my point to vendors was, look, my long-term goal is to be able to, quote unquote, walk into the master control area, which I guess we're not going to have anymore, but it was a while ago. And
now it's your bedroom, right?
Yeah, well, it's exactly. But walk into master control and say, we're going to launch another channel today, and take out my credit card, swipe it on the the front panel of the system, and within a minute or two, a brand new channel would magically appear. And of course, an oversimplification, but that was the idea. Why can't we just spin this stuff up when we want to? And then somebody invented AWS. Gee, they were listening.
Yeah, so I think what Richard's saying is what we're hearing from a lot of customers. They really want flexibility in their business. Now, the broadcast industry is changing very dramatically, right? There are lots of things going on, lots of changes happening, and many of our customers need to reinvent their businesses, right? It's not the same broadcast industry it was, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago. They need to be able to very rapidly test new ideas to either fail fast, or even better yet, succeed fast. They want to have a faster time to market. They want to be able to share their content easily with more distribution partners so that they can maximize the value of their content. They want to have now their staff working at any location globally. And I think COVID has driven this, but the truth is it's always been great to be able to get the top talent wherever they are in the world, to be able to bring them in remotely. And we certainly now have the technology to do things like that. They want to have easily tiered storage, so that you've got storage that's working storage, and then automatically things will move into archive storage without anyone needing to think about doing those transfers. Everybody wants to be secure. They want to use their best practices in order to maintain security. They want to enhance the monetization of their content using new ad technology, and also using insights from artificial intelligence and machine learning to better understand their customer needs, viewer personalization, doing better search for content production, being able to find the clips that you want to use faster, and then also doing machine translation for different languages, because again, we really do live in a global world, and we want to maximize the value of our content to spread it everywhere that we can. Customers also now becoming increasingly concerned about carbon footprints. And there's a recent event where Sky News did a remote production of the COP26 in Glasgow, which was remotely produced in London. And they claimed they were able to reduce their CO2 footprint by over 90% by doing that. So that's something that we're seeing a lot of companies becoming very interested in order to maintain the sustainability of their operations. And there's the good old-fashioned reduce costs, reduce costs, reduce costs. And that's something, I think all of our customers are interested in, to figure out how they can make more content for less money.
Wow, what a comprehensive list. Thank you, Mr. E. That's very good. That's very good. Mr. John Mailhot, anything you'd like to add to that?
Sure. I mean, I think as technology people, we think of the cloud as this neat technology, but really the interesting part is that it's a very different business model and different engagement model. You can rent infrastructure by the minute, right? And that's something that, yes, you can rent a production truck by the day, but but in reality now you say, well, you can rent these cloud-based infrastructures literally by the minute and by the stream and by all these different models. The other aspect is, when Thomas mentions reducing cost, really cost is a many-dimensional object. You'd think, oh, well, there's a net present value or this or that, but in the flux of the television consumption and distribution model right now, cost is also risk weighted. We don't all have a firm idea of exactly what we're going to be doing 3 years from now or 2 years from now or a year from now. We know maybe the rough parameters. So being able to say, well, I'm going to do flexible things now that I can flex later and chase the market and chase the consumer and chase the consumption pattern, there's a value there. So even if the dollar cost is more, the net enterprise cost might be less by achieving the flexibility. So it wasn't that Richard wanted to swipe his credit card once and launch a channel for 10 years. It's that he wants to swipe his credit card each morning that the channel is actually making its ratings, and the day it stops is the day he stops swiping. So what we've seen in deployment of the cloud is that, it's grown kind of from the consumer backward. So packaging and distribution for OTT was one of the first things to be cloudified, right? Most of those services now go through some kind of cloud on the way to the consumer. Next, we've backed into the pop-up playout channels. We have a lot of customers now doing playout channels in the cloud that are, event-based. Tennis Channel or others are good examples of that, where they're using cloud providers to, almost like we said, turn up a channel, do the event with it, turn it down at the end of the event. And increasingly, the velocity of those turn-ups and turn-downs is limited by how fast they can create the consumer attention and do the advertising of the channel, more than it is by the technology infrastructure to operate the channel. So I see this progression continuing back toward the venues and toward the productions themselves as we go forward.
Very good, very good. Peter.
Yes, thank you. So it's I think there are a lot of shifts in place here, and it's interesting how in our industry we've always been on these journeys towards movement, but those journeys have been accelerated and disrupted by actual events. And I go back, like Fukushima disaster was in the middle when we were already transitioning to file-based workflows from tape, and it just accelerated when the absence of tape. COVID, we were already looking at doing remote workflows. REMI was already a thing, and now COVID accelerated that. The one interesting thing I'm seeing right now is the supply chain disruption and how it's really made it hard to build facilities today too, because I was interesting last week at HPA, I was talking to some of the other vendors who were saying, well, the orders we're getting today, we're filling next summer, 2023. And so when you look at that sort of supply chain disruption, it also adds to what, Andy, you were saying earlier in an earlier presentation about this move to being software defined and being able to have that kind of agility, but also to not be dependent upon specific hardware in order to advance your operation. And so I think that that's one of the biggest changes we're seeing, and it affects everything we're doing, because moving to the cloud isn't really a technology decision either. It's a business enablement decision. It's about being able to give your business the agility to adapt to changing circumstances. And it doesn't mean just, needing different technology or connecting to a different provider. It can also mean simply, or different workflow, it could also mean simply because of the supply chain disruption not being contingent upon being able to source certain hardware to keep moving forward.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah.
At this point, I'd like to welcome Gordon. Gordon, great to have you with us. I know he had one or two technology problems. They say the audio is even more important than the video, and I think we were struggling to get. Are you up and running now, Gordon?
I think so. Can you hear me?
You are. That's great. So I'd like to throw you a double challenge. First of all, can you tell us what you do for your day job, and then can you contribute to this initial discussion with round robin we've been having of what you see as the end game that content creators are after from the technology capabilities?
Sure. So Gordon Castle with Discovery, and I'm part of our global technology and operations group based in London. And so where I focus primarily on the live parts of the business, live production parts of the business. So, in terms of content creators, and I think, what we've seen through the movement of things to software and to the cloud is opening up the world for content creators. And I think the interesting aspect is the desire to do more, to produce more, to be more flexible in location, right? But still have everything they had before, right? And I think that's the tricky part. And I think it is how do we make sure we enable them to have more flexibility, to create more, to have more resiliency in what they do at lower cost, but still keep the core features that they need to have, right? Because sometimes, what we need to do is also to think differently, right? You need to think differently about how you produce things and take advantage of the tools. At the same time, pay attention to the sort of core fundamentals. Of course, like I saw today, it's important to have audio working, right? And without audio working, it's a problem to do anything semi-creatively. But I want to do things differently, right? And in this case, it required me to use a headset instead of my computer, right? So I needed to do it differently. Otherwise, I wasn't going to be able to accomplish my job.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Very useful explanation. And lastly, and not leastly, back to Richard. Any other comments you'd like to throw in at this point, Richard?
Well, it's really hard to compete with all of that. But what I will say is I loved your slide earlier where you had the two triangles and you said, we want more production value and we want lower cost. And I think when you fundamentally get down to it, that is what everybody just said. So I'll stop there.
Very good. Very good. Well, thank you for kicking it off and giving us a little bit of insight. So reflecting on that, and I think I'll wing my way back to Thomas, seeing as he started with that massive list. So we've got to come back on some of those issues. So some of those capabilities you've been talking about there in terms of the content sharing, the staff anywhere, the tiered storage, the security, the environmental stuff. Any of those, we're obviously on a journey. And we're on a journey towards, a softer media production architecture. Are there any, in your new, well, I say new role, you've been there for a while now, but in your relatively new role, Thomas, are there any emerging technologies or adoptions that you see are starting to answer any of those points that you actually raised earlier?
Well, I think it depends on what part of the content supply chain you're in. Obviously, there's a lot going on in terms of file-based content production, file-based manipulation. This is something actually Richard Friedel at Fox started a long time ago about putting cloud and flexibility of the cloud into the supply chain. I think also we're seeing a lot of cloud-based play out. These are generally files being played out. And we've got thousands of playout channels on AWS today, and they're all working just fine. Live is kind of the new thing that we're really starting to cut our teeth on. And obviously live is harder because you want every single frame to get through for your tier 1 productions. Obviously, there are a lot of other productions where maybe you don't care about every frame cutting through. If one frame an hour doesn't get through, that's okay. We see a lot of live production in e-gaming, for instance, in their tournaments. That seems to be working out really well. Just in November, ATP Media, which is the media arm of the ATP Tennis Tour, put together a POC of cloud-based live remote production with AWS and Gravity Media. This was the Paris Rolex Masters, and they had 12 cameras with audio, and they had in Paris, and then in London at Farnborough, they had two production control rooms at the media facilities there. And they did, live video mixing, including, multiple MEs, transitions, DVEs, keyers and physical control services, ingest and recording, slow motion replay, scoring and data-driven graphics, multi-viewers, audio mixing, NLE editing, including fast turnaround clips, creating melts and archiving. They're able to do this all in the cloud. I'm not going to say this was necessarily an optimized solution, but this is really a discovery, not discovery communications, but a discovery event trying to discover what the potential was. And the feedback, we got from the operators was, this works great. We can do shows like this. That happened to use a technology called NDI for a lot of the interconnection inside the cloud, and was generally using higher levels of compression, H.264, to bring the bring the streams into the cloud. We also are seeing a technology at AWS called CDI, which is an uncompressed transport in the cloud, which makes use of the actual nature of the highly interconnected cloud network to provide multiple simultaneous paths to avoid any congestion or loss problems. So we're definitely seeing these technologies come along, and I think this is going to be the year where we really see maturation of live cloud-based production.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Gordon, would you like to build on that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think one of the things we're really seeing, I think it gets me driven a lot by the contribution links. Is that an aspect of live production? A big deal is how production value. A bigger deal is latency, right? And so one of the challenges for live production in the cloud has been the time to get up and down, right? Adding that step, and so. And we're fine to do that in the final distribution, but we don't want to do it in ahead of production, because then it delays every signal. So, but as contribution starts to move into the cloud, the natural thing is to say, oh, what's there? Now if I could just, produce it in the cloud, if I do my mixing in the cloud, then I can do my distribution. It'll flow. And so I think we're going to see it flowing from a contribution side. I mean, we're already using the cloud for a lot of contribution of smaller events, and we're using it for backup of bigger events, and I think that'll change. I think we need to do a little work around resiliency of the first mile, actually, right, into the cloud, and then we need to expand the capability, especially around audio and communication, because I think we will exceed what we can do today in the cloud in that realm. But I think Thomas is exactly right. This is a year when we'll really start to see this mature.
Great. Richard.
I think it's interesting listening to this, but my experience with the Fox television stations is slightly different, because of course it's a lower, I'll just call it lower performance type of activity. And Gordon's point about, as contribution, is naturally in the cloud, it is the logical extension. So at the station group, we've done a couple of things with cloud. The first, we started with a service called Fox News Now, actually. And basically it's just a live news service where they pick whatever the current hot story is, and they switch it up live. Very simple. And that is produced partially in a traditional way, in a quote studio and things like that. But they do have the ability, both for redundancy purposes and just for ease of production, where if a feed's already in the cloud and being distributed that way, they can just switch to it. So that works out pretty well, and it's very simple. I mean, it's not a heavy production load like some of the things we've talked about, or like a network production would do. But then, COVID sort of forced everybody to do lots of things. we have a division that actually does a game show called 25 Words or Less. And of course, you couldn't put an audience and all those people together. So they were very creative. And everybody's on either Zoom or some other, one of the similar platforms. They're all brought together. And that was produced, no surprise, by a cloud production switcher that was run by a TD in his living room or his bedroom. And again, very simple. Contestants, a host, it's not a hugely demanding thing. Coordination and timing are the hard parts. Andy, you made a comment earlier in your presentation, which I thought was great. So it's all about the connectivity, and that's a perfect example of that. The challenges were getting the timing right and getting the latency to the point where people could interact, but it really wasn't that hard to do. It just, we had to focus on it. And then we have another program, another channel that is Fox Soul. It's targeted at a Black audience, and all of those contributors are pretty much around the country. It's pretty typical. So think of it as talk radio, right? Everybody's around the country except there are a couple of people, on the set. And again, all brought together. Again, since nobody's in the office because of COVID, it's all produced cloud switching, and it really does work. So, the technology's there. Is it necessarily ready for all the kind of quality things that Gordon and Thomas talked to? Now we still have some things to work out, much as your WAN group is working out, little bits. But I'm going to say it's 90% there. I'm very impressed, and it really came faster than I thought. I think Peter's point about COVID really pushed us to do things that we probably would have been reticent to do before.
Thank you. And just in case anyone missed, about an hour and a half ago, I did a presentation, which was a bit of a precursor to this, to get people thinking about the journey we're on. So you might find it useful if you've just landed in this session and didn't see that earlier, to actually go back and have a little review of that. I make one or two little challenging points, so do feel free to check that out on our on-demand service.
It's a great presentation. You should.
Yes.
John, would you like to give us your 2 pence on this?
Sure. Like we said before, the cloud is a different business model, and we talk a lot about cost and managing cost and this and that. But I think, like in Richard's example with the game show, where the panel members or whatever are all over the country, if you drew a string around the whole cost, including travel and hair and makeup and hotels and everything else, even if the production cost a lot more to do this way, the net cost of the whole production is probably less. And not to mention the disruption and travel and on the part of the talent and everything else. So there's a lot of benefits to these kind of cloud-based productions, independent of the limited view of a technical cost. And I think that's where really, as an industry, we're going to kind of upscale in terms of the types of events we do in these cloud-based productions, from a game show, talk shows, up the chain. And honestly, it intersects with the REMI model of sports, where they were already, before COVID, doing mid-tier, low-tier games full REMI. Those are probably going to ratchet up too. I think the technology is there, or nearly there, for all these things to work quite well. Even things like fully software-based production switchers have come a long way since a couple of years ago. There's a couple in the market now that are software-based production switchers that make a darn fine looking television. So on the whole, this is less a technology problem and more of a finding the application, finding the market, moving it into the mainstream kind of challenge, taking the rough edges off of doing it. So instead of it being a one-up, it can be a regular event that every Tuesday we do the show that way without so much effort. That's kind of the next step, is taking all the rough edges off so it can become more of a mainstream technology.
Great, absolutely. And for those of you that joined relatively recently as well, just encourage you to make sure you stay and listen to John's update on the GCCG work that we've been doing, because I think some of that is feeding into making sure that what, the way we do cloud for live production is optimized in terms of interoperability, but also in terms of latency, and the way we do timing. So I think there's some good stuff there. And so do make sure you stay and check that out after a little while later in the presentation after this session. Peter, is there anything you'd like to add to the discussion at this point?
Sure, thanks. So if you look at this, I mean, I think the thing that really drives our industry a lot these days that we may not want to admit is uncertainty. It's really hard and getting harder every day to predict where you're going to go. I mean, none of us saw COVID, even those of us who were debating 2 years ago, COVID in a meeting, so like, what are we going to do? None of us thought we'd still be talking about it 2 years later, right? It's so one of the problems is in an era of uncertainty is making business decisions and not being and having then these uncertainties not cause us to have stranded capital, where we've made investments that no longer are appropriate because the world has changed under our feet. And so this is where I think moving to software in the cloud really excels, because it allows us to be much more dynamic and scalable and flexible in how we address the changing world around us. For live production, it's really the holy grail, because you're never going to get the cost effectiveness also unless you have end-to-end cloud production. Every time you bring something down, move it back up, whether it's a stream or a file, you've slowed down the workflow, you've added to your costs and stuff. So, and live production has been that holy grail that's kind of we've been working for, and I think it's really coming to fruition now. Not the scale as Thomas and I once talked about, that will do the whole PGA tour and move all 21 trucks, OB trucks into the cloud, but at least we're augmenting our live production today. And that's actually one of the things I'm seeing right now also, is even customers who are doing on-premises live production are augmenting it with cloud production as well. So they're giving, for example, their operators the ability to have their own customized work surfaces that change how they operate. And this is really neat, because in the past, everything we did lived in silos. We had the graphics operator, we had the audio operator, we had the TD, and then we also, had playout as a silo, we had post as a silo, we had deliveries as a silo. And what I'm seeing now is, as we move this to the cloud, and we have this flexibility because it's purely software, that they're integrating these work surfaces such that an operator on a single pane of glass working from home is managing the entire workflow from acquisition of camera to OTT for some part of it. Maybe they're doing the ad insertion, or maybe they're doing something else in there, but they're now, their responsibility straddles what were delineated silos before, and those silos are coming down, and it's really going to streamline these workflows and lower costs. So that's one of the big changes I'm seeing.
Sorry, just reaching for my mute button here. Wonderful. Richard, I believe you had some thoughts.
Yeah, I wanted to add something, and we've been talking about technology, but and Peter, I know was there, Wes was as well. The Hollywood Post Alliance had their tech retreat last week, and there were two sort of fundamental topics that came up there. One was sustainability, which really doesn't relate to this topic, but the other was just this: how we're going to do production in the cloud. And there were, I can't even remember, a dozen papers or presentations about this. We're talking about the technology and sort of talking about we're going to get there, and but I was pleasantly surprised to see that there was almost 100% acceptance that this is how we're going to do business going forward. That all the naysayers are gone. All this bit about it's not quite ready, or the latency is a problem. People acknowledge that we had some things to do, but there was almost total acceptance. That the number of people who got up and talked about how they were doing it or about to do it. I mean, people from like the NFL got up and spoke about this. NAP, of course, had a presentation about how their mobile units and their business is changing. It was intriguing to me that it had become so mainstream that it's a 4-day conference, and I'm going to say a third of the presentations related to this. It was pretty incredible, and some of the capabilities that people were talking about and trying to do augmented reality and those things were just really intriguing for a little broadcaster like me. So there's a lot of activity in Hollywood about this. For anybody who's still doubting it, if there's anybody in our audience going, well, maybe I'll try it next week, I don't know. You know what? You jump on the bandwagon. Everyone's going here.
I also think it falls into sustainability as well. I mean, I think that, this is a much more sustainable way. I don't think any of us have ever talked about the data centers that we've built inside of broadcast facilities and charted how it gets cheaper to run every year or uses less energy, right? We do the opposite, right? But the cloud does show how it's cheaper to run.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, whilst we're in conversation, Gordon, one question I had was on high availability. I know there's the other holy grail of the 5 nines of, live production needs to stay on air. That's the revenue stream. It just has to succeed. And I wondered if you'd got any comment on how we actually achieve high availability. I know even some of the big providers have had, challenges with DNS issues over the last few months that we've seen, etc. So what's your mindset on how you stay on air as we move into this new technology world?
Well, I think one of the things I think it's interesting still when people say that, it needs to be in my facility for me to know that it's going to run reliably, right? I think that, what we've seen is that, as we've implemented more cloud-based solutions, we run hundreds of channels in the cloud for playout in, dual zones of the world. And, that they switch instantly, right? And, the new playback systems run even on virtual machines, in 160 milliseconds, it switches to the backup automatically. We can spin up new ones instantly, right? You could never do that with previous systems. So our ability to sort of, be resilient and especially resilient at reasonable cost is suddenly there, right? Because you used to have to build multiple chains, right? And and the backup cost you as much as the main one, right? And now we can actually set up these things as we want them, right? Run active when we want to, run active passive when we want to, and actually get real cost differences. So, certainly what we've seen is that the resiliency scores go way up. But people need to think about it differently. And we have seen that certain things, you mentioned DNS failures, certain things do affect things in a kind of, a different way, right? So, somebody making a mistake on somebody's, an authentication or a licensing, right, can take you off the air. Where maybe in the past it was a power failure or a loss of a fiber line that did it. So it's different things that happen. So it's not saying it's perfect, but it is essentially clearly more resilient than previous architectures.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I've seen a question come in, which I don't think maybe everyone has seen. Tim Felsted, who's obviously joined us today. Tim, welcome. He actually is asking about what we perceive as the limitations of cloud today in terms of I think there's a suggestion here of maybe, doing UHD. What were those, when will the high value events or the expensive ones or the ones that need high resolution, etc. When will that stuff go? So I guess it's more of a general question on. I think we've already acknowledged that there's quite a lot of work happening in live production. Back that far down the chain, to use John's expression earlier, for what we call lower tier events, but when will it reach the high tier? I don't know if anyone would like to jump in there.
I think it's a constantly evolving thing. The technology keeps improving, the bandwidths keep getting larger, the server capacities and performances keep growing, right? Last year the PCIe 5 buses came out, the new Xeon Gen 3 chipset came out, and we were in one day able to double our capacity in a server into twice as much 2110. So we're seeing this kind of, being able to leverage the growth of IT, and the cloud is merely an expression of that allows us to really be able to leverage that. Yes, doing a 40 camera UHD workflow in the cloud with all uncompressed is going to be a little challenging right now. But we would expect that over time, things will happen to make that easier. And in fact, what I'm seeing is that I'm working with some major organizations, and they're clearly seeing the cloud as part of this model. And one of the things they saw was that having 2110 core fabrics and different transports across their networks to connect them, and the cloud and other things were creating bottlenecks and creating architectural limitations. They always had to manage resource assignments and stuff. The most interesting thing I've seen in the last 6 months is several major organizations moving to doing JPEG XS at the core of their network instead of uncompressed. And in doing so, being able to flatten their networks, not only across cities and facilities, but also the cloud. So basically they can share content without adding latency, without having to assign resources to make that happen. And it's a really interesting shift that I think really will enable something like we're talking about, because JPEG XS with UHD is far easier to transport than uncompressed. So it will lend itself to live production in the cloud.
Great.
And if I could follow on to that, yeah, and I'll say, first of all, we should thank the Video Services Forum for its writing of TR07, the carriage of JPEG XS and MPEG transport stream and IP, and TR08, the carriage of JPEG XS in SMPTE ST2110-22. Thanks to the VSF for these specifications, because they're going to help dramatically with interoperability. All of our major broadcast customers are now, I'm going to say, dipping their toes into, if not actively building out JPEG XS infrastructure to get between the ground and cloud. It definitely seems to be a great way of doing it. Often they're combining it with dual diverse physical paths using SMPTE ST2022-7 automatic failover at the RTP level. And that's a way of getting, what Gordon was mentioning about the need for ultra low latency. JPEG XS is a great solution for that. It's a standard that anyone can write to, and it's RTP, so it works really well with 2022-7 failover.
Great, thank you. Richard.
Yeah, I looked at Thomas, was talking about the VSF work. I just want to put a plug in for the ground to cloud, cloud to ground work that John, I can't say it. John's working, been working on. That group has really figured out a bunch of the the issues around this, and as that gets published, I think that's going to go a long way. Tim's sort of question is like when, and I honestly think probably this year, if I had to bet. Certainly next year, but this year. I've been told that a major sporting event did do some cloud switching, experimentation, and things like that to prove out the technology. I don't know that it actually made air, but I know. But my understanding is they were working on it to try and make sure it was practical, and we probably will definitely see it, in a couple of years when. As that cycle comes around and things like that. I'm hearing from a number of vendors, and whether they're cloud companies or whether they're other vendors, that these products are in development. I've seen some, to be fair, demonstrated. So you never know in demonstrations. You guys know how that is, but we're very, very close to seeing, I think, major events, starting to show up this way. I'm very confident of that.
Great. We've got one question that came in from Wes. What about network diversity or redundancy for home-based operators? Are companies encouraging their employees to subscribe to 2 or more ISPs? So I guess this is it's great if you can work from home and be a TD from home and have a really cool control service in your dining room. But if you've got just one broadband connection, then you're putting the whole production at jeopardy, I guess is the question here. So does anyone have any comment to that?
Yeah, so what we've done for, again, station group level, whatever the broadband is in the home, and then you back it up with a cellular hotspot. And that was the approach. A little crude, and 5G will make a big difference, but that's how we did it.
Yeah. That sounds good. Great. Okay, we're nearing the end. We've just got 1 or 2 minutes left. So just a quick round robin to see if anyone's got any closing comments they'd like to make about the journey ahead of us. John, I'm going to come to you first, see if you've got anything you'd like to say as we finish.
Just, it's less about the transports and all that stuff, and it's becoming more and more about the technology of how do I launch it? How do I monitor it? How do I, use it? And that's really the hallmark of all these things, moving from early adopters into the next phase of, bulk market adoption, is the ability for a less technical, user to use it. So that's the next big thing for cloud, is actually that movement from the earliest adopters to the next phase of adopters and their expectations of fit, finish, and tooling.
Thank you, Peter.
So I think we'll see two shifts. One, I think a lot of what we've seen so far has been a lift and shift, both in the technology and also the workflow. And so I think the first thing we're going to see is really getting cloud native and cloud optimized that really reduces the costs. And I've done some papers that show I can reduce playout costs by 95% in the cloud when properly optimized. So I think there's a huge opportunity there, for example. But on the live side, we have the chance to go a lot bigger than that, because we can actually spend a lot more resources in the cloud and still make it very economical. And I think we're going to see some serious reinvention in how we do live production in the cloud when we move away from just trying to transport the traditional models of production to the cloud and reinvent how we actually produce content. So this will be a fun ride. The next few years are going to be very amazing, I think, to see.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards.
Well, they say software will eat the world. And that's really the path we've been on. The goal when we first started IP for things like 2110, which, by the way, the Video Services Forum won a Technical Emmy Award for their participation in the standardization of SMPTE 2110. The goal was to get on IP so we can get on software. Now, it maybe has taken us a little bit longer. Getting on IP was easy, using Ethernet switches with a very dense switching capacity. That was not that difficult. Going to software was more of a challenge. But now we're really moving in that direction. The software brings you the flexibility. The cloud models make that even easier to create, to spin up, to tear down, to meet your business needs in a very flexible way. And I think we're going to be seeing over this next year lots of very interesting stuff, really addressing that live part of what you can do in the cloud. And I think by this time next year, I think we'll be asking the question, what can't you do in the cloud? There'll be very few things which will be out there, which you won't be able to actively not do in the cloud. I think that this technology is moving fast, and certainly all of our customers are very excited about the future and how it can help them reinvent their business.
Wonderful, Gordon.
I want to build on all these great statements, I think, and put a kind of a challenge out there to us, and that is to think more about the software and the IT approach than less about the transport. We've been so focused on transitioning and transport, right? And vendors still think very much as in, when you find a 2110 device and it magically has 8 pairs of audio in it, why is that the right number? Right? Because that's the right number it was before, because that's what fit, right? And I think one of the things is, and so, for example, we built a set of infrastructure and we scaled it for 64 audio tracks just because we needed a number. There's no magic to it. We've completely unbundled the notion of bundled audio and video, right? It's all put together by software. And, when we need to really think about the solution and the applications, not about the transport. And leverage the really IT approaches to it. And so the challenge is to think about that, and the challenge is to really help pull the company, the community that's still holding on to SDI was easy, right? And say we got to really move that forward to send clear messages to the vendors. This is the way you need to be, and this is the way you need to operate in order to be, a part of our future solutions. I think that's important to send a clear message.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Richard.
Oh, boy, it's really hard to follow all that. And I agree with that. I've already expressed my optimism and my belief about, where this will be over the next year to two at most. I think what I'll push on is just to say, look, pay attention to the work that's being done by the VSF. Please contribute to that work if you have interest. If you have ideas on how we can apply some of this, I think Brad has mentioned, software-based systems earlier, and I know it's a passion for him. And Gordon just did. I think you're going to see the BSF probably gravitate toward that, because that clearly is the future, and we're always looking for people to help us do it and to make a better television world out there for all of us. So
thank you
on that note, Andy.
Thank you. Wonderful. That's great. Hey, panel, you've been wonderful. Thank you for the debate. It's been really good. And with that, I hand back to you, Brad.
Great. Thank you. Fantastic job, guys.